in the most important meeting of his life at the Diet of Worms in 1521, he after it's over says, man, I really wish I'd said this line. So he was given a chance to help rewrite the record. And so in the record, he writes, then I said, here I stand, I can do no other.
Oh, yeah.
He apparently never says this at the thing. Most historians believe he never said it, but he thought it was such a cool line that he stuck it in the record there, and then he uses it a couple of times later. And he's a great writer. Kittleson believes he says it. Roland Bainton, another historian, believes he says it, but Martin Marty, who was here, and the vast majority of historians believe that he just added it to the record and then says it several more times, and everybody's like, you must have said that somewhere along the line, and he says, yes, I did. So a fourth thing that I like about him, and it's very much like what was said back there about his common touch and his common man stuff. I like how he translates stuff. And in undergrad school, I have a degree in ancient Greek, and so I would translate books like Mark, 1 Corinthians, and stuff like that. And so I really like the way he translates. He doesn't just take the Greek or the Latin and translate it straight into German. And at that time, German was seen as this crude language that couldn't communicate important thoughts, biblical thoughts, and that sort of stuff. And he said he thought he could do it, but instead of just translating it, sitting in a room, taking the words and translating it into German, he gets to say the sacrifices in the Old Testament. And he thinks, how would people, a common person in Germany, how would they understand this stuff? So what's he do?
Doesn't he go to the pub?
He goes to the butcher shops for that. He goes to the pubs for other stuff, various different things. He goes and listens. He's a great listener. And that's why he's such a good translator, is he listens to what people have to say, and he then translates using the language that they're actually using. And as a result, today, German is the language that you do most of your biblical scholarship in. The last thing, and this one is probably not a great thing, but it gets us started on where we're going for the next 30 minutes. It's 30 minutes, and then Gail's going to talk for how long?
10.
For 10?
And answer questions for 5.
Okay, so I'll talk for 45, and she'll talk for 5. So we'll start with today and what we're talking about today. And today we're talking about the intended and unintended consequences. You guys are going to tell me the intended consequences because you guys have all been through confirmation, and I didn't. So since I didn't grow up as a Lutheran, but you guys can tell me that. But the last thing that I think is, it's something that's very human about Luther, and that is he starts the Reformation, and it starts going. He starts this whole thing of rebellion going on, but he can't control it. He loses control of the thing. Other Protestants start popping up. Other people are saying he didn't go far enough. Even people at Wittenberg, when he's in Wartburg and in hiding, the guys he chooses to replace him end up saying, oh, he's not going fast enough. So he then comes back and tries to slow them down. And then the peasants say, we got to revolt too. And so he tries very hard for the last 20 years of his life to slow things down and keep it under control. But he can't do it. And that's what, and you might have seen in the note that Linda sent out, I think of the Reformation as being like a supernova. A supernova is a star that explodes and goes in lots of different directions, and that's what we have here. We have what he intended to accomplish, which is stuff that we've heard since we were young, and then the stuff that he didn't intend. And some of that stuff we all know, but there's one particular idea that is crucial for us, and it'll be important for us on this trip. You might disagree with me, and you can tell me if you disagree with me. But so let's start with some of the intended consequences. So you guys went through confirmation. What were some of the things that Luther was trying to accomplish? What sort of stuff? Any ideas?
Should read of indulgences.
Indulgences, that's a good one. And do you know how indulgences work? What were indulgences doing? They were discussed in our first class. What was the purpose of indulgences?
Buy your way into heaven.
It's actually not buying yourself. You're buying people who are in purgatory. You're trying to get them out. And there are a couple ways you can do that. But more importantly, what was going on with indulgences is if you became a bishop in Germany, you had to pay a fee And there's this one guy who becomes bishop in 4 different places, but he doesn't have much money, so he has to borrow very heavily. And to repay that stuff, and the money's going to Rome because they're building St. Peter's Basilica at this time, and they need lots of money. So this bishop bishop ends up borrowing tons of money, and he needs to repay the loan. So he brings in Johann Tetzel, who starts selling indulgences. So the actual effect is to pay off this huge loan. But the belief was that people were in purgatory, they had died, and they needed to get to heaven. Okay, what's another way? Does anyone have any other idea how you would get to heaven in addition to indulgences at this time if you're in purgatory? What's that?
You can make some pilgrimage.
You can
go and you get artifacts and you can pray to them. And
that's one. The biggest one at this time was to pay to have mass said for the person in purgatory. So, what year was the? What year did Luther post the 95?
1570.
1570. Very good. You guys have been paying attention. You get a $100 discount.
Off of what?
I didn't say off of what. I just said I didn't get a $100 discount for the next trip. The other way to do it is you pay to have mass done. So in 1519, at the church in Wittenberg, there are 9,000 private masses said for people in purgatory. So there are dozens and dozens of priests who do nothing but private masses with no one attending in the little side chapels along through there, which we'll see. And they're doing 30 of these a day, every day. And the idea is when they do this for the individual, and it's all in Latin, no one gets communion. I mean, at this time, you get communion once a year. And you get, what'd you get? Did you get bread and wine at this point? Yes, just the bread and one time. Very good. Just amazing me. Maybe you should teach next time. And so, did you know this mass thing? So 9,000 masses happened this time. By the year 1521, there are no masses going on because Luther attacks this.
When they say these masses and you say there's no communion, but was it a complete service otherwise?
It was, there are these, have you ever been to Europe where you see these cathedrals and there are these little side chapels? So the guy would stand up at the altar, do the whole service, break the bread, he'll eat it, and it'll all be in Latin. No one could understand what he's saying at this time, and then complete the thing and be done. And at that point, the person could move from
And
purgatory to
talking
heaven.
really, really fast, I suppose.
Have you ever been to like a Greek Orthodox service or something like that? You have no idea what they're saying because they're flying through it. That would be sort of, I mean, who cares? You're doing it by yourself. So that's one thing. What are some other things? Indulgences. What else was an intended consequence of the Reformation?
Well, one thing he wanted to show that the ministers, priests, bishops, and the Pope were not perfect.
That's good. And the term that eventually emerges, it's not one he uses, but one that emerges is called the priesthood of believers. That everybody can interpret the Bible just as much as the Pope can or bishop can. You can if you get the Bible. And he does that, by 1522, he translates the whole New Testament. And within just a few years, there are 500,000 copies of the New Testament that are distributed in just 5 years after his translation. So it's crazy. But by the 1530s, he has the entire Bible translated. So priesthood of believers, and that is everybody has access to God on our own, and we can interpret the Bible as well as other people. So that's actually one of the four I'm going to use. Okay, and anything else? Go ahead.
That we don't get to heaven by our good works. That it's Jesus who saved us, and that's all that's necessary. But because we love Jesus, we do what he asks us.
And does anyone remember the Latin phrase that he uses at this time?
Sola.
The solas. There are three solas. What are the three solas?
Soli Fide.
Soli grace and soli
Faith,
I helped
grace,
you out.
and
And what's sola scriptura? Does anyone know what that is? What's that mean? It means only the word, but what's that mean? I was taught something that's completely wrong growing up, but I grew up in a fundamentalist church, and that meant everything in the Bible is the only thing you can believe. And that's not what he meant by it. By sola scriptura, he meant on matters essential to salvation, that is what the Bible is central on. Not tradition, not those other things, but he's talking about what is essential to salvation. Now, other things like relics, he was okay with relics in some cases. He was okay with stained glass windows, which there were a number of people in the 1530s who started going into churches and bashing those out, saying you shouldn't do that. And he said, that's not forbidden in Scripture, so it's okay for you to do that. And it's not a matter essential to salvation. So that's what it means. And then only by grace, which is God is the one who initiates salvation. And then finally, only by faith, and that is our only responsibility is to accept that gift. And he says it's pretty much like the example he uses all the time is it's like a marriage, a wedding ceremony, where God would be like the person who gives you the ring, and your only responsibility is to accept it. And by doing that, you become a follower of Jesus. So indulgences, you got that one. The next one, priesthood of believers. And then the last one we'll talk about a little bit more, and that is that God is the one who's in charge, and he's initiating everything. And at this time, there's a great deal of, if you had to use one adjective to describe Christians at this time, that is that they were incredibly, incredibly fearful, because you didn't know if you had done enough to make it into heaven and to get out of purgatory. And Luther turns that all around by saying, once you accept God's grace and accept the gospel, you're in. And so there's not this great deal of fear anymore. So those are the intended consequences, some of the major ones. But that's boring. We all know these things. What I'm interested in are the unintended consequences. And this is Milton Friedman, who said one of the great mistakes is to judge policies and programs by their intended intentions rather than by their results. When we talk about unintended consequences, there are a bunch of things that you can probably think of that have unintended consequences. Just about every war that happens, there are unintended consequences. Prohibition had unintended consequences. Does anyone know what the Streisand effect is? Named after Barbara Streisand? Do you? What is it?
I don't.
Barbara Streisand, someone took a picture of her home.
Yeah.
She didn't want someone to take a picture of her home. At the time they took a picture and published it online, only 6 people ever saw that picture at that time. But she went to court to fight that. And of the 6 people who saw her picture of her home, 2 of them were her attorneys. So only 4 individuals at that point had seen them. Guess what happened when she went to court? Yeah, within a month, 450,000 people had seen her home. And so the unintended consequence was the exact opposite of what she was trying to do. And this is a bonus thing for you that I'm giving to you. This is at Auschwitz. Is anyone familiar with the cross that's at Auschwitz? Tell us about it. Raise your hand.
I know well, what did you want to know about it?
Well, what exactly happened? There's a cross at Auschwitz. It's created a great deal of controversy since it was erected in 1989. And we'll probably, I assume we're going to see it, right?
I hope so.
So Auschwitz, you have all this stuff. It's a horrible thing. 1.3 million people are sent there. 1.1 million of them die. It's, a million of them are Jews. There's another 100,000 gypsies, gay people, and a number of other people who were killed. And in 1979, the Pope goes there and does a mass, and they put up a cross. And several years later, these nuns decide to set up a convent there. And they don't build it in Auschwitz. They build it at the place where they kept the chemicals that became the gas that killed people. The Zyklon B is what it's called. And they set up a convent. Well, Jews become extremely upset about that. And then they take the cross that's used from the mass that the Pope did and set it up right there at Auschwitz. A number of Jews are very upset about this. And for 10 years, there's a great deal of fighting going on. And the response is other Christians start putting more and more crosses. So at one point, there are 300 crosses all around there. And Jews are upset because the Catholic Church didn't do a whole lot to help out during the Holocaust. And so they think that this shouldn't be there, but it's slightly off the territory. And they eventually negotiate a deal where the other 300 crosses are eliminated. They've shut down the convent, but there is a church right there on the property, and Jews are not happy about that. There was just a story in January about how the Jewish leaders wanted it to be removed, but the cross is still there, and it creates a number of problems. The Catholic Church wants to keep it there, and it's not been resolved to this point. So that's an unintended consequence. They thought this would be great. We're showing solidarity. We'll put this cross here. Bam! It all blew up, and it continues to be a major issue. So. So those are some unintended consequences. But I want to talk about unintended consequences of the Reformation. This is one scholar's picture of all of the unintended consequences. And you can see he's got increased literacy, religious diversity, because you have all of the different things. The Protestant ethic, which is that if you do work well, you'll get paid and you'll be rewarded not just in heaven, but here on earth. And then rationality, science, technology, and all of that sort of stuff. And that's actually where we're going to go. And the thing is, as I told you, it starts off as a religious movement, but it ends up having economic, political, cultural, and religious consequences. And I'm going to have 3 consequences that we talk about today. And the first one's the one I like a whole lot, and I care about a whole lot, and you better not disagree with me, honey. Okay? And that's this. That actually, when we go to Germany, you're going to encounter 2 things. You're going to encounter a very secular society, highly secular society, where fewer than 10% of the people go to church regularly. And we're going to be going to all of these highly religious sites. They're going to be side by side, okay? The thing is, these 2 are connected. What Luther started ends up having consequences that lead to what we call now the secular age. And I'll explain how this happens. Has anyone ever heard this idea before? Okay, Charles Taylor, probably my favorite philosopher, the Canadian philosopher, says, why was it virtually impossible not to believe in God in, say, 1500, right around the time we're talking about, in our Western society, while in the year 2000, many of us find this not only easy, but even inescapable not to believe. He says a lot of us feel a great deal of doubt. So what's happened between that time where everybody believed to today, where it's very easy, where it's a choice, you're making a choice as to whether you believe or not. And to understand this, you need to understand what the mindset is like in the year 1500. It's very, very different than what our world is like. You have to do a little bit of mental work to understand, because it's so different from what we're like. First of all, it's like a fish in water, where everything around you is religious and spiritual. That there are demons all around you, there are angels all around you, God is around here. Your body is actually not this self-contained unit like we have today, but demons can come in and possess you at any time. Angels can come in and take you over at any time. All this stuff is going on. You're very much a passive person in this process. And as I told you, you're very fearful about stuff. You're doing everything you can to keep from ending up in hell. Do you remember the story that we talked about earlier with why Martin Luther decided to become a monk?
Oh, the lightning.
The lightning thing, which is a little bit weird. Why would a lightning storm bother you so much? Does anybody have any idea?
Could have been comparing to St. Paul.
Well, you have that, but the thing is, there was a belief that if you had any sins that you had not asked for forgiveness for, you would go to hell. So at this time, if you're in a lightning storm, you haven't been to confession in a couple weeks, you get hit by lightning, bam, you're on your way to hell. So lightning is this incredibly scary thing, which to us seems goofy, but to Luther, he's facing the possibility, if he gets hit by lightning, that he's forever going to be tormented. So, I mean, this is the sort of weird, very different society than what we have. And these are the ways that they're immersed in faith. One, there's a sense of God's providence and divine cosmos. That God, it's not like God is out there and we're down here. Everything is contained within God. Two, that you're within this divinely ordered process at your church, at your home, in your community, and everywhere. And then finally, there's this term that sociologists use, that's an enchanted world. And that is where that you have these spirits all around you, affecting you and taking control of you and doing whatever, and you're incredibly passive about it. And the process that I'll jump to that in a second. And you know, artists actually illustrated what this was like, what it felt like in the year 1500 to be a Christian or to be in Europe. Here's one picture of demons and angels struggling to try to get hold of your soul, and the closer you got to death, the fight got even more and more bitter. And as I said, it's a very frightening situation. And this is Hieronymus Bosch, a guy who thought this was incredibly hilarious, and he made fun of this all the time, and he would just do all sorts of paintings saying, you guys are a bunch of idiots, it's not really like this. But his stuff accurately represents the way people thought about how society worked at this particular time. So Martin Luther comes along, and he thinks this is ridiculous. And he reacts to not just the works and all that sort of stuff, but the superstition and the fear, because he himself in 1515, 1516, 1517 feels a great deal of this fear too, and then he starts reading Paul, and Paul feels a great deal of confidence in his salvation, and he says, how is it possible that Paul is so confident when all of us down here believe that we're in this situation where we're passive victims of the system? And there's one thing I told you about your body, it's interesting. How many of you guys work out regularly? Okay. By regularly, I mean once every 4 months. Or everybody here.
Which 4 months?
Winter, summer.
And that includes walking from church to your car in the parking lot, whatever. But the concept of working out is just something you wouldn't think of in the 1500s because you don't control your body, okay? Today, we control our body. We dictate our diet, we dictate what we do. We're very much in control of our body. And Charles Taylor uses this term buffered, that there's an outline, a self-contained unit that we are in charge of. At this time, in the 1500s, it's what he calls a porous system, where things just can take over your body without anything going on, without you're having any control over it. So this process changes as a result of the Reformation today, where we run everything, and so we end up going to the whack occasionally and walking for 2 miles and then going home. So when Luther comes along and he starts criticizing and attacking the system, there are things that he does. One thing that he does is he pushes God up and out of the system. That instead of God being all around us and the demons being all around us, he has God up in the sky, and that God makes this decision. He makes the offer of grace and we accept it. It's no longer this system where we're surrounded by demons and angels and all that sort of stuff. So the result of this is a lot of things that we think of today as having natural explanations, back then they didn't. For instance, the weather. If there's a lightning storm or something like that, what did that mean at this time, back in the 1500s? It meant that God was mad at you or someone screwed up. Today, we use meteorology, and you say there's a science to this thing. So when God moves away, and the term is called disenchantment. So the world went from being highly enchanted, which makes it sound like a really sweet, nice, wonderful thing, but it's a terrifying thing. And as this changes over time, then we start seeing how these things operate. And what are other things that we have where they've become secular in our understanding? Another one is military stuff. Back then in the 1500s, it was believed the people who were closest to God would be the winners in the wars and that sort of thing. Today, we know it's military science. Tactics, strategy, and all that sort of stuff matters. So we've gone from seeing war as being a religious activity to where it's a highly secular thing that involves science. And here are 3 more. Agriculture. If the agriculture doesn't work in a particular year, in the year 1500, what would you do? You would actually engage in a witch hunt. Somebody in the community is not doing what they should be doing, and it's a literal witch hunt. You're trying to find who's screwing up. And that's why it's so important for everybody to believe the same thing. Because if someone doesn't believe what you think they should be believing, they're at fault for the problems that you're having. So witch hunts, actual literal witch hunts, are attempts to try to resolve problems like a poor crop in a particular year. And politics. That politics used to be seen as something that, and actually I just mentioned to you, that based on Romans 13, Martin Luther says you're not allowed to rebel. No one's allowed to rebel at all in any society. So it's an interesting thing what he would have said about the American Revolution. But today we understand separation of church and state, and most of our conflicts are about when you should allow the sacred to help you understand political matters. Should you or should you not on the issue of abortion? Should you or should you not on the issue of gay rights? Some people say no, there should be a complete separation of church and state, which would be a secular understanding of this. And some people say on certain issues you should be allowed to do that. And then finally, medicine. I think I've mentioned to you before, in 1215, the church council, the Lateran Council, actually tells people to quit going to doctors and nurses for treatment. And the church says that you should not be doing that. Well, who were the doctors at this particular time in the year 1200, 1300, 1400?
Barbers. Barbers often was a combination.
Those, but it's mainly Jews.
Yeah.
And they're basically saying you should stick to hanging around and doing the things that you should be doing in your Christian faith, and that'll take care of you. You should quit going to these Jews and having them heal you or fix you, because they probably are not looking out for your best interest. And those people who die after they go to the doctor, that's because the doctors are killing them. So that's the sort of attitude. Well, today, obviously, all of this has changed over the last 500 years as a result of the secular revolution. So that's the first one. As a result of what Luther does, he ends up helping us understand how things work naturally and seeing God as being the one who initiates salvation, but he's not the one controlling and telling us how to run everything and how the world should operate. And he talks a great deal about freedom and so forth. So the second thing, I still got 5 minutes to get through too. This one's a little bit weird. It's the issue of sincerity, which we think of as being around all the time. I sincerely meant that, I sincerely didn't mean that, that person's sincere, this person's not sincere. That's not a very widespread concept in the 1500s. In fact, the first time the term sincerity is used is in 1533, when this heretic named John Firth, he refers to another heretic and says that the guy was very sincere and you shouldn't kill him because he was so sincere. Another person who uses the term sincere in the German is Martin Luther. 4 of his 95 theses talk about what people sincerely believe or should sincerely believe. So these concepts are coming out as to the value of sincerity. And here's the 4 reasons I think it becomes important at this particular time. The first one is that in the past, sincerity has been used to describe objects. It meant that something was very pure. It wasn't meant to explain what people were like until the 1500s. At that time, and I use the term pure because it's a synonym at this time for sincerity, that you would talk about pure gold, something that's completely pure. And then the definition changed where they started talking about people who believe things sincerely or did things for the sincere reasons. So why is it that sincerity becomes so important? Who was the one who talked about works earlier when we were talking about the importance and the change from believing that works saved us to believing faith and grace saved us? That's a big and important thing with Luther. So what you do had been what was important, doing the right thing, okay? Well, with Luther, it changed to why did you do these things? And did you do these things for the right reason? So people started focusing on why you would do this, why you would do a particular good act. And Luther would say, in fact, even if you did certain good acts, helped somebody out, but you didn't do it for the right reason, then it served no benefit before God. So the reason for your doing it is incredibly important. And then other reformers took this a step further and said that the most important thing about your faith is not what's going on externally, doing this stuff for other people, but what you're doing internally, and you needed to become true to yourself and so sincerity becomes very important. You need to be sincere and authentic. And sincerity and authenticity are important values, and they're contrasted with the Catholic Church, which is seen as superficial and hypocritical. The Protestant Church is seen as sincere and authentic. This is the sort of dynamic, and there's a writer in the 1560s who makes this point. The church, the original church, through ambition and pride, was much altered from the simple sincerity of the primitive time. So that's how the church originally was. The Catholic Church screwed it up, and so forth and so on. So today we see sincerity all around us. If you follow music like I do, you see groups that are incredibly sincere, like Bon Iver from Eau Claire, who's very sincere. Fleet Fox is a very, very sincere group. But when you get too much sincerity, there's a flip side to that. Does anyone have any idea what that is? If people become incredibly saccharine and overbearingly sincere, not that any of us know people like that, what is the opposite of that? What's the other side of that coin? Any guesses?
Sincere.
What's that?
Insincere.
Irony. Where you start undercutting that and making fun of that. So, you know, that when you think about things today, it's amazing that so much can be interpreted in terms of culture, music, art, writing, as this dynamic and this struggle between sincerity and irony. And this is a concept, these are concepts that have emerged as a result of what Luther did, to move everything from focusing on doing works all the time. And it didn't matter whether you meant to do it or whether you happened to do it. When you were doing these works, when you're paying for someone, when you're paying for an indulgence, it didn't matter if you were happy that you were paying for an indulgence, it just mattered that you did it, right? So under Luther, that all changes. Are you sincere? Do you intend to do this? Are you authentic when you're doing these things? And so it changes the way that we start talking about so many different things. And as I said, every day you can see this dynamic being played out as to whether people are sincere, ironic, that sort of stuff. And you can, I'll point to George Bernard Shaw in 1903, who was sick of sincerity and said, "It is dangerous to be sincere unless you are also incredibly stupid." So he's someone who falls in the irony camp. So 2 minutes to go. And you guys will have to do the work on the last one. And that is, one notion, if we go back when I talked about this second one, that everything was divinely ordained, and you were not that important. Your only importance was where you were in the social order, okay? You were a soldier within an army. You were a citizen within a society. That was what was important, whether you fulfilled the role that you were given. Well, as a result of what Luther does, the priesthood of believers, as you were mentioning earlier, the final thing that emerges that's important for me, and then there are so many other things that emerge. One is, how many denominations do we have now? We have more than 500. You can go up and down North Avenue and find 10 different denominations. Well, that's all a result of the Reformation, obviously. But there's also the individual matters. And this is good and this is bad. The good is, you know, people who wouldn't have a voice before now have a voice. The bad is everybody who calls me thinks I should care what they think. And sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. But there's also the leveling effect that the hierarchy is squished down and the people at the top aren't as important as they used to be. And obviously it affects our politics. Economically, we change how we do things, and also democracy emerges as a result of this. We wouldn't have democracy today if Luther hadn't started this process where you as an individual matter, what you think matters, and whether you vote matters. So those are my 3 things. And I got it done in time, Gail. So, do you have any thoughts on these 3 things? As I told you, you might not agree, you might, but the thing about this irony, the thing about the secularism is important because we moved in a complete opposite direction. This clearly isn't something that Luther intended or wanted, but it is something that's come about. The sincerity thing, I think that is something that he pushed, obviously, in his 95 Theses. He brings up this on several occasions, but it's gone way beyond what he intended. And then today, the importance of the individual in just about everything we do, that is another consequence of the Reformation. So those are the three main things. Anybody have any thoughts or reaction to these ideas? Go ahead.
I'm just wondering if he was so interested in sincerity and being sincere in your beliefs, how he arrived at his feelings toward the Jewish people who were sincere in their beliefs as well.
He actually, and that's an important thing from last week, I told you, he never thought the Jews would be saved if they remained Jews. But he thought it was a matter of ignorance. They didn't have the New Testament in their language. They didn't have the catechism in German. So they didn't have access to this information, and he was convinced that if he was able to translate this stuff and put the message of the gospel in their language, they would convert in great numbers, okay? But when he does this stuff and they don't convert, he becomes very, very angry. So you see this transition in terms of one thing that never changes is he thinks that the Jews are always going to hell if they remain Jews, but he thinks that they will convert if only he has a chance to tell them the gospel in his own terms and in their own language. But when that doesn't happen in the 1530s, he becomes pretty harsh, more than pretty harsh. I gave you that passage last time from the 1530s where a Jewish rabbi came and said, you know, the heads of our region where Luther lived are kicking us out, taking our property, and torturing and killing some of us. Could you step in and help us out? And Luther says, no. And then he goes to the prince and says, there's still some Jews living in Saxony. We need to get rid of all of them. So, but this is after he's made this decision where he believes that they will convert if they just only have the New Testament in their language, and then they don't. And you know, he thinks it's not a matter of sincerity. He thinks that they are downright evil, and he thinks that actually he suggests that they're running around killing babies and they will come and steal the communion and doing horrible things to them. So sincerity it's still actually consistent. He just believes that they're not sincere in what they believe. Anybody else have thoughts, ideas? So probably by the time we go on the trip, we'll have like 3 or 4 more of these. So while we're on the plane, I'll say, okay, what about this, and this? So for the next 15, 20 minutes, Gail's going to give us very practical advice on what we need, what we don't need, and all of the important stuff. Also, I brought articles. I brought 2 articles. Once you go on this trip, you're going to start seeing all sorts of stuff about Luther everywhere in the media. You'll start seeing stuff about Auschwitz in the media. You'll start seeing stuff about Germany in the media. These are 2 articles that appeared in the last week. One was a front page story in the New York Times on Auschwitz and how they're preserving it, and the debate that's going on about what you preserve. Do you make it look like a museum? Do you make it look like what it looked like in 1945 when the Soviets arrived? Or do you just let it disintegrate and remain where it is? What do you do with, and something that we'll see, what do you do with all the hair? They preserved all of these people's hair who've been executed. What do you do with that? Some people think you destroy it. Some people think you keep it. It's all turning gray. So do you dye it? These are the decisions that are being made about what you do with this. One thing that they decided not to do is to allow anybody to take photographs of it. So the story has 14 different photographs. You'll see who's been to Yad Vashem. You remember this very powerful thing about the shoes when you see there, or you see it at the Holocaust Museum there. Well, I mean, they have those shoes preserved just like that, but they have many, many other things, including kids' drawings on walls, and all of those sorts of things. Glasses, they have tons of glasses, and that sort of stuff. And the debate is going on as to how they preserve these things. The other one was a story in the Journal Sentinel by Jim Stengel. He wrote a story about a Holocaust survivor, someone who was born at a concentration camp who lives here now, and what's going on. So I'll leave these things up here at this table if you're interested in either one of these stories. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I would like, do I need a microphone?
Yep.
No? You're okay with that? Okay. This conversation will
I'm
just
getting
keep
undressed.
going and going and going when we're on the trip. And that's the beautiful part about being on the bus, is that there's a microphone, and you and Chris can
share the microphone, fight over it, do whatever you want to do, because I think that's the beauty of having someone like Dan along. And you will also appreciate our tour escort, because she is a fountain of knowledge, and history just pours out of her. So you're just going to be, you're going to be fed constantly. Okay, you all have those lovely bags. You can do whatever you want with them. I have nothing to do with them. They just get sent to me and I present them to you. And actually, some people do find useful uses for them. So if you want to put your water bottle in during the day or whatever you want to use them for. Inside is your e-ticket for those of you that are flying with us, which is most of us. Someone's going to ask me about the seats, and I'm going to tell you right now, I know nothing. I have tried to find out. I have tried to find out what the block of seats is that we have, and I have gotten zero information. I suspect, but if I find out differently, I suspect that you will find out your seating assignment when you get to the airport. If it should be that you can get your seating assignment as it was on the last trip, 24 hours prior to the departure, I will let you know. I will send out an email and say this is what you have to do. But for now, I cannot help you on the seating assignment. So, let me just see. Yeah. Okay, and you, I can tell you the hotels are very nice. I don't think you will be disappointed in the hotel. And it's nice because we stay 2 nights in most places, except for Krakow and Wittenberg. But otherwise, you've got at least a chance to settle in a little bit. Your emergency numbers are on the back of the second sheet down near the end. And you essentially have 2, and that's Camilla, who is the tour escort, and Pastor Chris. Also, the hotel numbers, you know, can be used for an emergency. The bus. Plan on being here no later than 10:30 a.m. on Saturday. Our hope is that the bus will pull out of here at 10:45. And we've got a huge bus, so there's plenty of room. There's plenty of room for your luggage. 50-pound limit on your luggage, on your check-in bag. You all know this information. Why am I? But it's just good to just go over it and review it.
One thought I had was if there's anyone that's not done much traveling that wants to stay afterwards, we can kind of answer some of those kind of things, like, you know, how do I know I've got 50 pounds? All those kind of, you know.
You gotta wait.
What's that?
Always wait.
Right.
We have a
So
lot of-
those that don't
Yeah.
understand that, I'm
Yeah.
happy to meet with right afterwards.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so that's the point. So yeah, so those kind of getting questions.
Lois.
What I'm wondering about is the money.
Yep.
Should we bring an amount of money so that we can change it to euros when we get there, or how will we do that?
I'll tell you what I'm doing. I'm bringing $100 US just in case. But I will be at the ATM machine getting my euro cash the whole trip. So if I need money, I will go to an ATM machine and I will get euros. I'll get as much as I think I need for my lunches. I might get 100 euros max.
So that means you should have a debit card that you can use at an ATM machine, okay? If you're not somebody that has one, like I don't have one. So what you do is you go to a bank and you ask them for an international Visa card that's a debit card. It's a prepaid, you put your money on there, and it holds X amount of dollars, whatever you want to put on. I'll probably, just to make sure I've got plenty, have like 500 on there. That's a lot, okay? But then you use that to go to an ATM machine and get money out as you need euros.
So that's an international.
Usually you ask for an international debit card, it's a Visa, and you tell them, this is what I'm doing, I'm going to Germany, I wanna use a Visa card that I can go and get money off an ATM, and they say, okay, we will, it's, you know, it's like $5 for the Visa or whatever it is, $5-10 for the Visa, and then you give them how much ever you want loaded onto that card, and they give it to you right there.
I got an international Visa card, but I didn't load it, it just comes
I
out
have
automatically.
credit cards too, if it's set up
Yeah.
correctly, you
You
can,
can just,
you
Yeah.
can, but you should check that you can put that
Right.
credit card in the ATM and get money out, because
Certain cards do certain things.
sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, and check for the fees.
You would rather use your ATM card that's connected to your checking account
Debit card.
than your, your debit card, than your Visa that you use at,
You're not,
you
cha-
know,
you're not,
Home
you're,
Depot
when you
and
draw
all
money
those
off a
places.
Visa, they
That's
charge you
more
an exorbitant
expensive once
fee.
you
Well,
put that in the
sometimes
machine.
they do, but.
Depends on your card. So
Yeah,
you need to
just
talk
have
to your
check
card
your card.
and ask them directly.
Yeah.
Tell them you're going overseas.
Tell them exactly what you're doing.
But as a newbie to ATMs, because
Yeah.
I've never had to use one until I
Sure.
got the card now to go overseas, your ATM card that I got through US Bank works, it's a debit card against my checking account, works just fine and
anywhere you go.
anywhere you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Use mine all over the
I mean, so then the alternative is to bring cash with you, and when we find a currency exchange place, you know, to just say, here's $100 US, and they'll give you the exchange rate, and they'll take off their fee, and then you've got your euro. I intentionally went and got us Polish zloty, and I got us cash so we'd have that once we got off the plane. The only problem is they gave me in large bills, so we'll have to we'll group
break 'em
up.
down. We'll just break them.
We'll break them down when we get to a merchant and we'll split it up. But we've got, I think we said about $15 per person in, because that's the only one that's kind of